The birth of America is not a tale written in haste, it is a saga of oceans crossed, of civilizations colliding, of colonies rising from wilderness, and of a people who dared to imagine freedom when the world thought it impossible. The age of exploration in 15th century Europe, the winds of change were blowing. The continent was restless, hungry for wealth, power, and discovery. The Ottoman Empire had closed the traditional routes to Asia, and spices, silk, and gold became treasures locked behind barriers. Portugal searched for a way around Africa, Spain looked westward, and England and France watched closely, unwilling to be left behind. The ocean was feared, a vast unknown where ships might vanish forever. Yet, it was also the frontier of possibility. When Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492, he carried not only the hopes of Spain but the hopes of an entire continent desperate to expand. His arrival in the Caribbean was not the end of a journey, it was the beginning of a new world. The discovery of the Americas unleashed a wave of exploration. Spanish conquistadors marched through Mexico and Peru, French explorers traced the rivers of Canada, and English settlers sought fertile ground along the Atlantic coast. Each nation saw opportunity, but none could imagine that these lands would one day give birth to a republic unlike any other. The clash of civilizations was immediate. Native peoples, with cultures stretching back thousands of years, encountered Europeans who brought steel, horses, and disease. The meeting was both tragic and transformative, reshaping the destiny of millions. Subscribe and like to keep following this journey. The first colonies, the English colonies, became the foundation of what would later be the United States. Jamestown, founded in 1607, was fragile, plagued by hunger and conflict, yet it survived. Plymouth, established in 1620 by the Pilgrims, carried with it the dream of religious freedom. These settlements were not just outposts, they were experiments in survival, in governance, and in community. Over the decades, more colonies rose: Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland. Each had its own character, its own struggles, and its own vision. Together, they formed a mosaic of human determination. Daily life in the colonies was a constant balance between hardship and hope. Families often lived in small wooden houses, surrounded by vast forests that had to be cleared for farming. Children worked alongside their parents, tending crops or helping in workshops. Markets bustled with activity, where goods from Europe mixed with local produce. Ships carried tobacco, cotton, and timber across the Atlantic, while returning with tools, fabrics, and books. This exchange created a vibrant economy, but it also tied the colonies tightly to Britain's mercantile system. Yet, within this dependency, colonists began to sense their own strength, their ability to sustain themselves, to govern their towns, and to build communities that reflected their values rather than those imposed from afar. Life in the colonies was harsh but full of promise. Families cleared forests, planted crops, and built towns. Trade flourished across the Atlantic, bringing goods, ideas, and wealth. Universities like Harvard and William and Mary became centers of learning, while churches and town halls became places of debate. A distinctly American identity began to form, one that valued resilience, hard work, and the belief that ordinary people could shape extraordinary futures. This identity was not imposed by kings or parliaments, it was born in the soil, in the sweat of farmers, in the prayers of settlers, and in the courage of communities who believed they were building something new. Colonial society was diverse. In New England, Puritans built communities rooted in faith and discipline. In the South, plantations grew tobacco and cotton, shaping an economy dependent on enslaved labor. In Pennsylvania, William Penn's vision of religious tolerance attracted Quakers, Germans, and Scots-Irish. The colonies were not uniform, they were a patchwork of cultures, beliefs, and ambitions. Yet, despite their differences, they shared one powerful trait: the determination to survive and thrive in a land that seemed limitless. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe and hit like. Tensions with Britain. As decades passed, the colonies grew stronger, more prosperous, and more confident. Towns expanded, trade flourished, and universities and churches became centers of thought and debate. A distinctly American identity was forming, one that valued hard work, resilience, and the belief that ordinary people could shape extraordinary futures. Yet, tension was inevitable. The colonies thrived, but they remained under the authority of the British Crown. Taxes, restrictions, and laws imposed from across the ocean began to feel suffocating. The growing tension with Britain was not only about taxes, it was about identity. Colonists began to see themselves less as subjects of the Crown and more as Americans. Pamphlets circulated, written by fiery voices like Thomas Paine, whose common sense argued that independence was not only possible but necessary. Town meetings became arenas of debate, where farmers and merchants discussed rights, representation, and the meaning of liberty. The idea that ordinary people could challenge kings was revolutionary in itself. Every new law from London, every soldier stationed in colonial towns, every attempt to silence dissent only deepened the conviction that America's destiny was to break free. The 18th century was a turning point. The French and Indian War had drained Britain's treasury, and the Crown looked to the colonies to pay the price. Taxes on paper, tea, and everyday goods sparked outrage. The cry of "no taxation without representation" echoed through taverns, churches, and town squares. The Boston Massacre in 1770, where British soldiers fired on colonists, ignited fury. The Boston Tea Party in 1773, where patriots dumped tea into the harbor, became a symbol of defiance. These were not isolated events, they were the heartbeat of a people awakening to their destiny. Leaders emerged from this storm. George Washington, a soldier of dignity and resolve. Thomas Jefferson, a thinker with words that could inspire nations. Benjamin Franklin, a diplomat whose wisdom bridged continents. John Adams, fiery in his defense of liberty. These men, and countless others, carried the hopes of millions. They knew the risks. To defy the British Empire was to invite death, yet they believed liberty was worth more than life itself. Subscribe and like to keep history alive with us. The Revolution in 1776, the colonies took the boldest step in their history. The Declaration of Independence was signed, a document that thundered across the world. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. These words were not just ink on parchment, they were a promise. A promise that this land would be free, that its people would govern themselves, and that a new nation would rise from the ashes of colonial rule. The Revolutionary War was not fought only on battlefields, it was fought in the hearts of families. Wives managed farms while husbands marched to war. Children grew up hearing the thunder of cannons in the distance. Communities endured shortages of food and clothing, yet they persevered. The winter at Valley Forge became a symbol of sacrifice, where Washington's army, starving and freezing, held together through sheer will. Foreign allies, especially France, brought crucial support, proving that the struggle of the colonies was recognized as a fight for universal liberty. Each victory, from Saratoga to Yorktown, was celebrated not just as a military triumph but as proof that the impossible was becoming reality. The Revolutionary War tested the resolve of the colonies. Battles at Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, Saratoga, and Yorktown became legends. Farmers became soldiers, merchants became patriots, and families sacrificed everything for the cause of freedom. Against the might of the British Empire, they fought not just for land, but for an idea, the idea of liberty. The winter at Valley Forge was brutal, yet Washington's army endured. French allies joined the fight, tipping the balance. And in 1781, at Yorktown, victory was finally won. Independence and legacy. When independence was finally secured, the moment was both triumphant and daunting. The colonies had won freedom, but now they faced the challenge of building a nation. The ideals written in the Declaration of Independence had to be transformed into institutions, laws, and a government that could endure. The Founding Fathers debated fiercely, crafting a system that balanced liberty with order. What emerged was not perfect, but it was groundbreaking. A republic where power flowed from the people, not from a monarch. The legacy of this era was more than independence, it was the creation of a national identity rooted in courage, resilience, and the belief that freedom was worth every sacrifice. The birth of the United States was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A republic had been forged in courage, built on hope, and destined to inspire generations. From discovery to independence, the journey was long, painful, and glorious. It was the story of people who refused to surrender, who believed in freedom, and who created a nation that would one day stand as a beacon to the world. Subscribe and like to keep history alive with us.